This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trevor Sheeran.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. You may notice a couple different things about this episode. We are currently at Prairie Springs Farm with Nancy, who does the Equine approach, which Mayfield Counseling Centers has partnered with. We are in their barn, and we've got a horse whose name is...
Red
behind us.
We have two horses.
Oh, yeah, we do. We've got a little...
We have another horse named Silver, who's kind of hiding right now.
And for Rita and I, who are not cat people, we've got a cat that has decided to...
Pete.
This is what cats do.
They choose somebody that doesn't like them and try to win them over.
Right, yeah.
And look at him. He's really content, just enjoying himself there, not picking up your energy at all.
Oh, he's very happy.
Well, and you mentioned a word that we'll probably dive into a little bit more later in this episode about energy, because from my understanding, equine assisted therapy has a lot to do with the energy between people and horses.
Sure does.
Well, I'm glad that we're here. This has been a long time coming and fun, because I've worked with Nancy for...
Many
years. I don't know how long. We actually started at Aspen Point doing an equine group at a different place, and went really well, and then it didn't, and I won't say anything more than that, but here we are, and it's exciting. So I think, Nancy, just give and I want to have Rita speak to this as well, but give us just an overview of what type of equine therapy you do, because I know there's a lot that is out there, and if people are a little bit up on things, they know that there's a difference between equine assisted and equine facilitated, and who does what, and learning and therapy and that kind of stuff. Can you give us just a brief overview?
Yeah. I find that most people are going to use the word equine therapy, and being kind of a grammar police nerd, I want to point out that that's really not accurate, because equine therapy means therapy for an equine. Right?
Yeah,
so,
that works.
And our industry has a big committee right now that's working very hard on figuring out what a standard terminology can be. Because this industry has grown so fast in the last 20 years that we haven't even kept up with ourselves in some ways. The big difference that I want to point out is what is equine assisted therapy or equine facilitated. I'm going to say we could use either one of those. Therapy as opposed to equine assisted learning or coaching or anything else. And the big thing is these guys. It's not therapy if you don't have a therapist. So I'm not a therapist. By myself, I am not technically doing therapy. It doesn't mean that I don't have a lot to offer in terms of personal growth, but we don't get into that same level, and you guys can speak more to that. So when I partner with them, it's equine assisted therapy. When I'm working by myself, it's equine-assisted growth or equine-assisted learning. Okay?
Nice. Yeah, it's really important. I love this modality for therapy because we can get so much further in 6 or 8 weeks with a client than we can in a room with them. Oh, I don't know if I want to talk about that today. Or us trying to, tease out what's really going on. The beauty, and you brought it up, Trevor, thank you. The beauty part of this is we have a horse with his own energy that calls out stuff with the client. So for us to be able to work with a horse, they have to be able to trust us. And that's the first thing that we work on, connecting and relationship and trust. And oftentimes the clients that we see have issues with all three of those. And so it's really helpful. They can see what hypervigilance looks like on another person. For someone who really struggles with anxiety or self-regulating, maybe there's problems at school, maybe they don't like to listen to their parents. Well, they have to be able to communicate with the horse, and the horse has to be able to trust them, or they don't get to work with the horse that day. And so in a very short amount of time, they will learn, because who doesn't want to work with the horse?
Yeah.
So far, we haven't met maybe one that wasn't too thrilled. Right.
I want to start from a foundational thought that we've talked about before, and maybe Nancy, you can talk to this. of why horses are useful for therapy, and it has to do with them being prey animals, right?
Absolutely, that's the deal.
Right there.
They are a prey species, and that makes them very different from dogs. And I've had people come in and say, oh, he's just like a big dog, and we're quick to point out that he's really not. I have a lab at home, a Labrador, like many of us do, who would like to be glued to my side all the time. That is not the case for these guys, okay? To be touched is to be vulnerable. When you're a prey, you don't necessarily want to open yourself up to that without feeling super safe. And so they're going to wait and test the waters and read our energy before they allow us in. They're always looking around their environment. Rita mentioned hypervigilance. It's pretty much what they do. They are a herd animal. It's always safer to be in a herd. The lion might get one of us, but he's not going to get all of us. So we're all going to be looking out. And so they cue off each other, and they cue off us. And one of the biggest cues that is not emphasized enough is breath. Breath. We have to be able to show that we're relaxed, that we're not breathing up tight in our chest because we're worried about something, because they're going to pick that up, and you'll see it reflected. And then as we, and maybe you could tell the story, and as we get into taking some breaths, doing some grounding, Rita has some different awareness exercises, and some of them are super simple. You can see the horse relax. His head starts to come down. His jaw starts to loosen. He might smack his lips or take that big breath or that big blow. And that's that feedback that you were talking about, that they will sooner listen to from the animal than from us.
Yeah.
Well, and I find it's interesting. The client doesn't have a choice not to be transparent. Right?
That's a good point.
If they want to work with the horse, they have to be transparent. And I know when we did stuff with Aspen Point, there are times where we had to pull kids away. I remember getting kicked once because this kid had disassociated while leading the horse, and it was one of the horses that we had that wouldn't normally, because I saw the horse getting ready to kick, and I stepped in front of the kid and got, not hard, but the back leg got me in the thigh, and because this kid was not being genuine to himself and was actually trying to escape the emotions or whatever was going on in that moment. And so I love it because you have to be authentically you in the moment. And if you're scared, say it, right?
Yeah. And they would sooner accept that. Oh my gosh, you're really big and I'm feeling really nervous. Okay, let's take a few steps back and just relax with that instead of pretend that everything is okay, because then you're going to get a behavior like that, which isn't a horse's first choice. They're a flight animal. First choice, run first, ask questions later. They're exquisitely built for that. So then they'll turn around and go, oh, what
happened? Yeah. So the story, real quick, just to kind of bring that into, I share this a lot, and I know Rita's got stories, and I would love to hear more stories today too from you all, just the impact of this. But this one kid that we had at Aspen Point was just a ball of energy, and I always joke that it was bottled that energy, and I'd love to take it with me because I need it. But that kind of energy that's not regulated or at least talked about, a horse is not going to want to have anything to do with it. And I don't remember, it's going to bug me until I remember the horse's name that we had, but it was, just, maybe it started with an S. I don't know. Anyways, but it was more of like the Eeyore type horse, right? That, when we were leading the horse back to the pen, it was almost like dragging him.
Very stoic.
Very stoic, very slow. And we thought, okay, this kid might be the one that we could put him with, and the horse wouldn't have anything to do with him, And so I could see the kid getting frustrated, and so teaching the breathing piece, right, breathing from your diaphragm and your gut versus your chest, and I taught him to do 3 or I think it was like 5 or 6 mindful breaths before he would get anywhere near. So the horse maybe was 5 or 6 feet away, and then we'd take a couple steps forward and then do more mindful breaths. And I could see the horse starting to calm down a little bit, and so I had asked him to close his eyes, the kid, close his eyes and put his hands out and take a couple more deep breaths, trusting that the horse would follow suit. And I kid you not, like it was like the 10th breath, the horse took a deep breath too and leaned into this kid's hands, and the kid opened his eyes up. It was like, holy crap, what's going on here? But he connected to such a point that I remember watching him come back. We had a group, and so watching him come back every week, and he'd stand at the gate or the barn door and take 10 deep breaths, and then come to the stall and take 10 deep breaths, and just really regulate himself. And the effects, though, this is what I want to talk about too, if you have more stories, but the effects of this on this kid was self-regulation. And it's not stuff that we tools, or we gave him tools, but it wasn't these things that we told him he had to do and then check off the box, like we do sometimes in the office. And so it was getting a better grade, and he was being obedient at home and all that kind of stuff, and just to see the effects of that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest benefits of this work, is that we don't have to teach them and tell them, if you practice this will work. They see it work. They feel that it works when they're out here in the moment and experiencing it with the horse. The horse, there's no better teacher than a horse. It's truly amazing work. Sometimes it's really hard to put into words just how wonderful it is. You mentioned picking horses. We like to let the horse and the person pick, so we give options, and almost always they will pick the horse that has the same type of maybe issues. And here's where I'm going with this. We have one horse here in particular that cribs. That's a very self-harming thing. Cribbing is when they put their top teeth on a rail or a fence and pull back with their neck, and what that does is let a big rush of air go in. It kind of is a little bit of a high for them, and it's so damaging because it lets all that air go into their stomach, and that causes them to colic in some instances when it's extreme. So when we have young gals or young boys, doesn't matter, who are self-harming, it's amazing how they gravitate towards that horse. And then when we can have discussions about his self-harming behavior, they are more concerned about him hurting himself, but then that also opens up beautiful opportunity for us to say, if you care so much for him, how about you care for you, right? And how about we talk about those self-harming behaviors and maybe figure out a different way, like taking 10 deep breaths before you do something. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Well, and for those of you that are listening to the podcast, I'd encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, because we'll have some video later on just the ranch and looking at the horses and more kind of tutorial on that. But it's for those of you that are listening and are trying to picture this and don't maybe have any experience with horses, or have not done this, I really encourage you to find a way to kind of experience it, or at least visualize it, whether it be on a video or coming out to this ranch if you're in Colorado Springs, and calling Rita to set up a time to maybe do a tour or something like that, just to be able to experience it, because to be here is to really know it. And we can share all the stories, which is great, but unless you've been around a horse, you don't fully understand it.
I think there's a lot to be said for just being out in nature and being with a horse, just being outside. As a population, as a society, we have stepped so far away from our original agronomy roots so quickly in just short numbers of generations that it's very easy to forget that you can just feel peaceful, right? So.
Well, and anyone who's listened to the show for any amount of time knows that I'm a huge fantasy nerd. And a lot of fantasy novels, like if you look at The Lord of the Rings, horses are a really intricate part of the people of Rohan. And there's this really beautiful depiction of the relationship that a man and a horse, or a person and a horse, can have that really is lost in our time and can be really beautiful. And just the short amount of time that I've spent here with Nancy, you, and Rita has been really incredible, because there's something, there's something almost archaic to it, archaic feeling. It feels like a root of a people long forgotten, that we can re-experience some of that relationship. And what's beautiful about relationships is we learn a lot about ourselves through a good relationship. And from what I've seen, that seems to be the case with a relationship with a horse as well.
Well, and that was so huge for me growing up. When people that have listened know my story a little bit of self-harm and suicide. And middle school and early high school, going out to the barn was my saving grace. Getting away from people that were judging and bullying and that kind of stuff. And so sitting in my stall with my horse, allowing her just to be there with me, non-judgment, I think is the big thing, is these horses don't judge, was my saving grace. And yeah, it was an escape, but it was a good escape, and we talk about good coping skills and bad coping skills, with our clients a lot. And this is a good coping skill. And by the way, for those that are listening or watching and you're hearing all this noise, we are actually, just to remind you, in the barn. And it's feeding time. So these horses are having a lot of fun. A hay day. There we go.
Well, and you can even see on our YouTube, Silver, is that?
Silver back here?
Silver is that the mini or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's catching some sun right now.
And the bigger one is Red. Red right now is eating at hay. His breakfast.
Nice. So
just a little horsey knowledge. He's eating out of a slow feeder hay net. It's more natural for a horse to graze and nibble throughout the day than to have a big meal like a wolf. Again, they're a prey species, a prairie species. We always need to be mindful of that.
So maybe I would like to transition for a minute and just, I love stories. So I'm going to put both of you on the spot just to think for a minute. So as I'm talking, think about maybe a story that was impactful for you watching a client, or just even you and a horse together, to kind of continue to share that narrative of the importance and the beauty of equine assisted learning and therapy.
You first.
I have one that, there's a couple. One of the things that is really important that I teach in my therapy with horses is being aware of how you feel, because you have to be present with your own feelings in order to not shove them off onto the horse, because that's not fair. And so I had an adult client actually, and I said, so where in your body do you feel that? And he was so angry. If one more person asks me that today, I'm like, oh, okay. So we let that slide. But another story is working with a group of people that were transitioning out of the military. And that in and of itself is traumatic. And all of them were transitioning because of their trauma that they had experienced. And for various, combat, military sexual trauma, all of that was part of this group. And as the last group activity, we asked them to build a river with poles, and then there were objects that they had to identify as having meaning for them as a group. The whole thing was to get all 8 people and the horse and the objects on the other side of the river. And I had one individual who, because of his trauma and physical issues, was unable to speak. He would communicate, he could hear, and his mind was incredible. But to speak back, he used my cell phone to text back, right? And I could tell that he already had it figured out before I stopped giving the directions. So I let them circle up and figure it out. And it was amazing because there was one woman whose military sexual trauma was deep and very problematic. And this same gentleman, had to walk with a cane, and they put a board down, and she's the one who, after everybody else had all the objects and all of the other things across, the horse was already across, she led him across a very narrow board across that river. And to me, that was so healing, because he had to allow somebody to help him, and she helped a male figure who could be very representative of all of her traumas. So the things that happen here are really amazing and transformational. Yeah.
You're talking about the military kind of prompted a story that I like to tell. There was a gentleman who was a veteran. He was transitioning out. A lot of anger, a lot of tension. He was a very brusque guy, and he had been an officer. He was large and in charge, for a long time. he comes in one day and he's very tense and he's like brushing his horse like that, and the horse is like backing up, backing up, backing up, and we're like, what do you think? Let's just stop a minute. So we do that sometimes. We stop, take a step back, maybe give the horse a little break, because it's super important not to offload too much stuff on these guys. That's not fair. So we're very aware of when they need to take a little break from us. And we spoke to him and talked about how he could be here now, what the horse might actually like from him, what would work in this moment, did some breathing, and then reapproached. And it was a completely different approach. The head of the horse was down, the face was relaxed. Allow the guy to touch him and brush him. And we processed afterwards. So what do you think about that? He goes, shoot, that's the same thing my wife has been telling me for a long time, and I didn't hear it until today.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to point our readers. There's a lot of great resources out there. There's the Professional Association for Therapeutic Horsemanship International. There's what's the EAGALA stand for?
Equine Assisted Growth and Learning Association.
So if you check those websites out, they have good resources and research. You can also Google my name and equine therapy, and my dissertation still comes up. That was over 2 years ago, but has more of a qualitative storytelling approach if you want to know more about it. But there are, we can sit here all day and talk about stories and stories and stories. I guess my question for you both is also what if somebody were to come, so if somebody's listening and they're in Colorado Springs and they say, that sounds like something my kid needs to be a part of, or I need to be a part of, what do the first couple days or couple sessions look like? Because I think it could be, yeah, that sounds all well and good. I've never been around a horse and that scares me more than actually coming. So what would the first couple sessions look like, if they're thinking about coming?
Well, one of the things I did want to bring up, and this is a great time to do it, is, we did talk about horses making faces or threatening to kick or doing things that I just want to say that's really not the norm, okay? This is super safe. We are members of the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship. Safety is always number one. Going slow is also number one. We generally do not ever ride the horses, so you don't need to feel like you have to risk physically to do this. We start very slow with introductions. A lot of times we don't even really lead a horse on the first day. It's just more about approaching and retreating, knowing when to come in and when to step out, and reading the energy to build those connection skills.
I think one of the good things, too, is on the first day, they learn to read nonverbal cues on another sentient being. And I think often that's becoming harder and harder for young people to do if their nose is in a computer or a video game or things like that. That's lost. And so they can see what that looks like, and they can recognize, he's raising his head and he's looking at me and he's perking his ears, so that must mean I need to pay attention to what's going on. And that's super important, because then they can also recognize that in their peers and maybe their parents too, when it's chore time or dinner time. So we really slow life down and kind of start with some very basic things. And relationship is another important thing.
So what I'm hearing real quick is that basically the way you have some ideas and some frameworks of how the progression is, but really it's up to the client in the sense of what their needs are and how fast you're going to go, and not every group is going to look the same.
And we come in with a plan in our back pocket, and a lot of times it just stays there. It's very, very organic. You do need to think on your feet. The words connection and relationship are huge.
Yeah.
Like you said, the connection, we have all this virtual connection. We can all be in touch with anyone all over the world at any time, but what's that really doing for us, right? And it's virtual, it's not real, like you pointed out. These guys, you have to be truly authentic, which can be scary. You talked about bullying. Sometimes it's not safe to be who you are, or it doesn't feel like it is, but that's exactly who they ask you to be, is who you are. And if you are incongruent, if your outside and your inside aren't matching up, they're going to see right through to that inside and go, whoa, Jack, you need to think about something before you come over into my space, because I don't feel safe with you. You're not a good leader for me. You're not a good herd member, excuse me, for me.
And they don't judge. They don't care who we are, as long as we're not trying to pretend we're something different than who we are. And I think that's a really important thing for a lot of people, right? And so it can be, they just learn to be present in the moment, which is so very important. Another good thing that the horses teach us is, safety is a big deal, and their best mechanism is to turn and run, but they immediately spin around, look at what it is, and then go, oh, okay, big deal, nothing. And then it's over. They don't carry it in a backpack for the next 25 years.
They discharge.
They let it go.
Their stress. They do a big blow. You've heard a couple of them back here. They might lay down and roll, kick their legs. They might shake. They discharge that adrenaline, icky energy, and then come back down to stasis. Because if you think about it in the wild, if they stay in that agitated state and their cortisol is buzzing around, it's going to wear them down. And when the real predator really comes, they're not going to have the wherewithal to get away.
Right.
I'm hearing two things that I'd love to hear your feedback on. It almost seems as if equine-assisted therapy exaggerates certain parts of our life in a way that is a degree separated from real life, and so we're experiencing a horse's reaction to us the way we would experience a person's reaction to us, but in an exaggerated way, and it's not a person. And so there's a degree of safety to that. And also, I'm hearing that the horses kind of reflect us, and in our care for the horses, as Rita, you talked about, we don't want the horse to be in this fight, flight, freeze mentality for a long time and wear itself down. And then when we reflect on ourselves, we've been doing that for the past 13 years.
Right. Well, the whole idea of mirror neurons, I think, is really important too, and the fact that if it's interesting, you'll experience it, but the idea of if you're taking a deep breath and the horse is coming down, they're going to take a deep breath too because they're mirroring. It's we don't get that very often with humans. Right, if I take a deep breath right now, Trevor, you're not going to probably follow suit. You might,
unless it's a yawn.
Right? Right. But the horse, if we're really intentional, the horse is going to mirror back to us, and that's some really immediate, amazing feedback. But I like the kind of the one place removed is we're experiencing ourselves in light of something that's bigger than us, and how do we apply that to our family life and our friend life and our socio-economic. Wherever we are, I don't know, I just made that word up. Wherever we are in life, it's a good representation of that.
I think the safety of being vulnerable with a horse, I think you're right on the money, because some people have not been able to be vulnerable. So if you can practice that with a horse, then it becomes much easier to be authentic and vulnerable with the other people in your lives. And then relationships can really blossom out of that. I've done some great work with couples, and it's pretty amazing what can happen with a couple working with a horse, because the horse becomes the issue. The other issues aren't the issue. The horse is. And then I can use my little motor neurons and figure out how to connect all of those things together and say, oh, I wonder how that might be impacting anything. Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what equine-assisted therapy looks like, because I think we've talked a lot about the purpose and the meaning behind it and what it can accomplish. But I know that even though I've been in the pen with some horses and done a few activities, I'm still a little bit fuzzy on what actually happens during equine-assisted therapy.
Yeah. I've often said that in some ways, if you're just standing back watching a session, it's a little bit like watching paint dry. Because not a lot happens, like it's not an action-packed video game like we're all used to. It's so much about being and not doing. It's about relationship and not task. But as far as what we're actually doing, some of it is that approach and retreat. It's that simple. Some of it is just that energy, like Mark was saying, where you even just put your hand near a horse and watch how that affects the horse and then pull it back. We do a lot of grooming. I teach some simple body work things that help horses feel better. And we do leading. We do leading over obstacles, so simple things like just logs that we step over or cones that we weave around. That just ups your connection and your focus with the horse, and sometimes people need a little bit of a purpose. Rita likes to talk about that we need horses and people need a little bit of a purpose. And then we go a step further and assign a meaning to those obstacles. So the cones become math, science, and English that you have to get around, or something in your relationship or whatever. And you stop and you internally process that thing. Like every time I open up my math book, my stomach gets tight or whatever. You stop and process that. Take a look at your horse and see if he's doing anything different. And a lot of the time he is, and you might see him tense up just the way you're tensing up, and it's that wonderful feedback.
Yeah, that's the beauty part of having Nancy and I work together with the horse, because we can watch the client and the horse simultaneously, because the horse does get feedback. If somebody's walking up to an obstacle that they've assigned a meaning that is painful or anxiety provoking or whatever, the horse gives feedback. Sometimes they will stop and shove it down into the ground.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll stop and pick it up with their mouth and throw it,
or walk away,
or they'll look and go completely away from it, and
tune out.
and then we can say, this is what we saw in the horse. Does that have any bearing on how you feel about any of this? And it sounds very woo-woo, and it all works. It's like, it does. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah.
Well, I'd like our listeners to take a moment too to think about this. If you're in therapy right now and you're like, how could this benefit me? I think it's gonna. Oh, hi, Kat. Kat's coming over to my lap now. A 6 to 8 week group could exponentially enhance your kids' therapy, and make strides in ground that is almost unheard of in an office piece. And so, I know you are probably thinking this is something else that costs money, but it's something that's well worth the money spent, because you're going to be less in office, kind of long term, where if they're doing the group for 6 to 8 weeks and then they go back to their in-office therapist, they're going to make they could be done quicker than if they didn't do this. And I think it's a very very wise and important investment.
Well, and I've even looked up prices for like how much it would cost to go on a railroaded horseback ride, where they tell you exactly where you can go for this amount of time, and it's like 30 minutes costs like $75 or something. Like it's a whole lot of money, and
Right.
all you're doing is just sitting on a horse as somebody else guides it. And this, from my experience, like if you're looking to spend more time with a horse and more intentional time, this is a far better experience than that. And I would say probably not as expensive either.
Yeah, it's kind of beautiful, the relationships that clients will build with their horse over those weeks, and sometimes they extend. The other thing I want to say about for people who are interested in coming as an addition to their therapy, I'm all about coordinating care. And so I love to work with other therapists to help and benefit their clients. So I'm all about that. Yeah.
That carryover is a huge,
Yeah.
important piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nancy, we were talking before we started filming about some of the differences between basically a professional certified equine assisted therapy experience and not. Would you mind sharing just a little bit about the differences in that and
question.
what somebody should be looking out for in that?
Yeah, thanks. The model that I prefer and that we all agree on it's called a diamond model, where there's 4 points to your star, your diamond. There's the therapist, the equine specialist, the horse, and the client. There are people who will hang out a shingle and say, I'm doing equine therapy as an individual. That's a combination of the two roles. I feel like just on a common sense level, 2 heads are better than 1. 2 sets of eyes, 2 sets of ears. Accountability, awareness. I have my specialty, you have your specialty. So we're greater than the sum of our parts. That's a common sense piece. The other piece is, what kind of training does the person that you're looking at have? There are countless different folks in the Colorado Springs area that are offering this. So find out, like, what's your training? What's your background? Do you have liability insurance? Do you have a license? Do you have a certification? How long did it take you to get that certification? What's involved in that? What professional organization are you a part of? Just do a little bit of homework like you would with anything else.
Well, it goes back to our conversation probably about a year ago with, like, what's the difference between a registered psychotherapist and a licensed therapist? You know, we talk about that a registered psychotherapist just takes a test and pays $180 and they can hang a shingle without any education. And that's not okay. And it's the same thing with this, is that there are, with PATH, I mean, there are certain certifications you have to go through. Yeah. There's an overarching governing body that we pay attention to, right. and it's a lot of trainings, whereas there are people out there that say, hey, I like horses and I've got one, let's do it. Go. And it's like, yeah, no, not a good idea.
Not really, not if you're going to go at it in a professional way. And the other thing is, if you run into an unprofessional situation and something doesn't go right, that impacts the rest of us who are trying our darndest to do it the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, any last minute takeaways that you'd like to give our listeners before we wrap up?
I just think it's a wonderful experience, and I believe in the benefits of equine assisted therapy, and I just encourage you to think about it. Give us a call.
Thanks for joining us. Be looking out for some more information about the work that Rita and Nancy do here, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.